Imagine pouring years of your life into writing this epic fantasy novel.
Okay.
You've painstakingly crafted an alternate history of the American frontier. You're twisting real events and historical figures into this grand, magical mythology.
Right, a massive undertaking.
Yeah, exactly. So the book comes out, and you get a letter from a passionate fan.
Yeah.
And they absolutely love the story.
Which is always great to hear.
Yeah. But then, at the very end of the letter, they add this little postscript. They write, "By the way, I never knew George Washington had been beheaded."
Oh, no.
Yeah. They didn't realize it was an alternate history. They actually thought your fantasy novel was a factual history textbook.
I mean, that's a moment that is simultaneously hilarious and, frankly, utterly terrifying for an author.
Oh, completely terrifying.
It forces you to realize that the cultural foundation you thought you were building on might just be, well, completely hollow.
Exactly. And that incredibly revealing anecdote comes straight from the man who lived it.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, for you listening, we are opening up a really fascinating stack of sources to explore the long, immensely complex, and fiercely debated career of science fiction legend Orson Scott Card.
And it is quite a career to unpack.
Oh, definitely. We're pulling directly from a highly detailed YouTube interview transcript by the independent journalist John Del Arroz, alongside an exclusive Fandom Pulse article titled The Frontier of Myth.
Two very detailed sources.
Right. And our mission today is to really get under the hood of Card's monumental impact on science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah.
But we're also going to look at his incredibly rigid philosophies on the craft of writing, his sharp critique of modern readership, and his highly controversial standing in the modern publishing industry.
What's fascinating here is that looking at Card's career gives us far more than just a retrospective of a famous author.
Right.
We can actually use him as a lens to view the tectonic shifts in American mythology over the last...
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Through his work, and perhaps more importantly, through his friction with the publishing ecosystem, we can track the evolution of publishing politics.
Which have changed immensely.
Immensely. We can see the changing expectations of the genre reader, and as that George Washington anecdote perfectly illustrates, the shifting baseline of our shared historical literacy.
We have so much ground to cover today, but to really understand any of his broader cultural critiques or, his battles with the industry, we have to establish the sheer undeniable weight of his legacy first.
We really do.
Because you don't get to loudly criticize the foundations of modern fantasy unless you've built a few foundational pillars yourself.
Exactly. You need the credentials.
And the numbers drawn from our sources are just staggering. I mean, over 50 novels.
50? That's just wild.
16 Hugo nominations, 13 Nebula nominations. And he didn't just get nominated. He actually won both of those prestigious awards twice.
Which, is an achievement that requires a bit of historical context to fully appreciate, especially for anyone listening who might not be deep into the sci-fi.
Right. Break that down for us.
So in the science fiction and fantasy world, the Hugo Awards are voted on by the fans, the readers.
Okay.
But the Nebula Awards are voted on by the science fiction and fantasy writers. So that's the author's peers.
Ah, so it's two totally different demographics.
Exactly. To win one is a career-defining moment. But to win both for the exact same work requires a virtually impossible consensus.
Right, where the hardcore fan base and the critical literary establishment completely agree on something.
Which almost never happened. And Card pulled off that dual victory twice, back to back.
It's mind-blowing.
John Del Arroz makes a very pointed remark in the source material about this, actually. He notes that Card won these awards back when things mattered.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded statement.
It is. It really hints at the current, highly polarized state of industry awards that we'll definitely explore later. But historically speaking, those wins completely cemented Card as a primary architect of the genre.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this a bit more.
Yeah.
Because the undeniable cornerstone of that entire architecture is Ender's Game.
Without a doubt.
The sources note this single book has sold over 10 million copies. 10 million.
It's hard to even conceptualize that number of books.
It really is.
Yeah.
But, sales figures are just math. The cultural footprint is what really matters here.
Yeah.
And Card shares this amazing story in the interview about a junior high librarian.
Oh, I love her.
It's so good. She told him that Ender's Game wasn't her most borrowed book. It was her most lost book.
Right. Lost, in quotes.
Exactly. Kids would check it out of the school library, read it, and then simply refuse to bring it back.
And just keep it.
Yeah. They would rather face the late fees, face the wrath of the librarian, or, pay for a full replacement than part with the physical copy of the story.
If we look at the psychology behind why a book becomes a quote-unquote lost book in a middle school library, it's profoundly revealing. Well, think about it. A 12 or 13-year-old reader is in a period of immense psychological transition.
Oh, middle school is the worst.
Exact. It's often a time of intense isolation, of feeling totally misunderstood by adults, of feeling like you are operating under rules you just didn't agree to.
Right, you have no agency.
Precisely. And Ender's Game is fundamentally about an isolated, brilliant child who is forced to bear the weight of adult expectations and systemic...
Oh, so they see themselves.
A young reader doesn't steal that book because it has cool zero-gravity laser battles.
I mean, they are cool, but yeah.
They hoard it because it stops being mere entertainment. It becomes an artifact of their personal identity.
That makes total.
Card himself noted that if young readers can't bear to part with the book, it must be touching something incredibly... It acts as a psychological tether during a really chaotic time in their life.
I think that's exactly it. It's not a book they read. It's a book they feel.
Yes.
And yet, the sources are careful to point out that Card's legacy isn't just a monolith of Ender's Game.
Far from it.
Arroz mentions Treason as a personal favorite, but he specifically highlights Speaker for the Dead, which is the direct sequel to Ender's Game, as being equally, if not more, profound.
Many critics would agree with that.
Arroz notes that Speaker introduced him to a radically deep moral architecture. Let's talk about that, because the whole concept of a Speaker for the Dead is just utterly subversive to me.
It really is a unique concept.
The idea is that when someone dies, a speaker researches their life and tells the absolute unflinching truth about them.
Not a eulogy.
Right. Not a eulogy, no comforting platitude, just the raw truth, exposing their darkest sins right alongside their greatest virtues.
It was a revolutionary concept for science fiction in the 1990s. You have to remember, the genre was heavily reliant on clear-cut heroes and villains, right? Space operas, technological problem-solving.
Very black and white.
Exactly. But Card introduced this deeply philosophical, almost anthropological mechanic. A speaker doesn't judge the dead, they simply provide perfect context.
Which is so hard to do in real life.
The subversive part is the underlying argument that true empathy, true understanding of human soul can only be achieved if we abandon the polite fictions we tell at funerals.
Wow.
We have to look at the ugliest parts of a person to truly forgive them. Introducing that level of complex, mature, moral architecture to a genre reader completely changes how they process character and consequence.
It demands so much more from the audience. But here is what I find truly remarkable about Card's current perspective on it.
What's that?
What you hear constantly about prolific artists who grow to bitterly resent their most famous work. It's the blockbuster curse.
Oh, sure.
A director makes one massive, defining superhero movie, and suddenly nobody wants to talk about the quiet, brilliant indie dramas they spent the last 20 years making.
Right, they get pigeonholed.
Like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle famously hated Sherlock Holmes because it overshadowed his historical fiction.
He even tried to kill him off.
Exactly. So I would imagine it's incredibly easy for an author with over 50 books to feel completely trapped by a 10 million copy juggernaut like Ender's Game.
It is the eternal trap for the prolific artist. But Card shows immense grace in the interview transcript regarding this.
He does.
When Arroz asks him if there's a lesser-known book he secretly wishes had received the Ender's Game treatment, Card refuses to take...
He doesn't complain at all about the long shadow of Enderwigan.
Not at all. He simply expresses deep gratitude that any of his books managed to find an audience in such a fiercely competitive industry.
Which is a remarkably healthy outlook.
He states he's proud of all his stories, and if one of his obscure, lesser-known novels worked for even a handful of people, he's just glad the story found its mark.
I love that attitude, but I do want to push back on it a little bit, or at least explore the creative reality of it.
Okay, go for it.
Because in the source, Card openly admits that he doesn't know the magic formula.
Right.
He says if he actually knew why books like Ender's Game or Speaker for the Dead resonated so powerfully and sold millions of copies, he would use that exact formula every single time he sat down to write.
Who wouldn't?
Exactly. So, if an author doesn't know why a specific book hits that global nerve, how do they keep creating?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you sit down at the keyboard to write novel number 40 without quietly trying to reverse engineer your own master? It feels like you'd spend your whole career just chasing ghosts.
And that is precisely the creative death spiral that ruins so many successful authors.
Right.
They try to write the same book over and over again, and each iteration just loses a little more soul.
It becomes a formula.
Exactly. According to the sources, Card's mechanism for avoiding that trap is a relentless, almost combative drive to write fresh, original narratives by deliberately turning away from whatever is popular.
He actively avoids the trend.
He refuses to play the hit. He simply tells a story he cares about and trust follow.
Which is risky, but it clearly works for him.
But this intense drive to avoid repeating what has already been done, to avoid the easy tropes, leads us directly into what might be his most fiery, controversial critique of the fantasy genre's current state.
Yes, okay, let's unpack this critique.
Yeah.
Because he really does not pull any punches here.
Not at all.
Card's major argument is that American fantasy writers are completely trapped in what he calls Tolkien's shadow.
Right.
He argues that instead of creating something new, American authors are obsessively recreating European feudal systems over and over again. And the Fandom Pulse article explicitly points out that he names names. He isn't just speaking in abstracts.
No, he goes straight for the modern titans of the genre.
Yes.
He specifically calls out George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire.
Game of Thrones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone listening who follows the genre, we know Westeros inside and out. Politics, the dragons, the endless war throne.
The Starks, the Lannisters, all.
But Card looks at that and points out that at its core, it is fundamentally just a European feudal culture.
Right. It's the Wars of the Roses with dragons.
He also brings up Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight archive. We all know the expansive world of Roshar, and Card actually praises Sanderson's magic systems. He calls them incredibly creative.
Sanderson is known for his magic systems.
He is, but Card critiques the fact that despite this wildly imagined magic, Sanderson still defaults to a pre-gunpowder world governed by kings, high princes, and knights.
It's the exact same political structure.
Yes.
He even mentions that Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan and the Barbarian, pointed a way out of this European shadow decades ago.
Right, sword and sorcery.
Yeah, Howard offered a completely different, pulpy, untamed flavor of fantasy. But, as Card observes, American writers largely ignored that path and fell into line right behind J.R.R. Tolkien instead.
They took the safe route?
Oh, and I cannot leave out this specific detail from the interview because it's just so visceral. Card has an absolute, quote, shuddering aversion to zombies and vampires.
A shuddering aversion. I love that phrase.
Right. He actually expressed profound gratitude to any writer who refuses to use them.
Which is a fascinating little aside, but it perfectly illustrates his overarching philosophy. Well, vampires and zombies are ultimate symbols of narrative decay and unoriginality for him. They are literal reanimated corpses of old ideas being paraded around as new and...
Oh, wow, that is a great way to look at it. Literal recycled corpse.
Exactly. But looking past the monsters to his larger critique of European feudalism, this raises an incredibly important question about literary identity.
Which is?
What does it actually mean for American writers to almost exclusively rely on European myth?
It's but strange when you think about it.
It suggests a rather striking lack of confidence. It's as if American authors don't view their own history, their own folklore, their own vast frontier as a viable, sturdy enough canvas for epic fantasy.
They just default to kings and queens.
They instinctively defer to the old world for legitimacy.
When you frame it that way, it feels like a massive missed opportunity. Let's look at it structurally.
Okay.
It's like an American architect being given an empty city block in Chicago to build a modern skyscraper, but they insist on using the architectural blueprints for a 14th century French castle.
Yes.
Like, sure, it might look impressive, but it fundamentally doesn't fit the landscape or the cultural DNA of the space it occupies. Why build a castle when you have the materials for something entirely new?
That's a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It really speaks to the incredible power of literary inertia.
Literary inertia, I like that.
Why does the publishing industry, and frankly, why do the readers themselves feel so secure with medieval tropes?
Because it's what we know.
Exactly. It's because the market has been conditioned over 50 years to equate the very concept of epic fantasy with European feudalism.
Right.
When you walk into the fantasy section of a bookstore, there's an unspoken contract between the cover art and the reader. If there's a sword and a crown on the cover, you know exactly how the society works.
You don't have to learn a new political system.
Card is a veteran of this industry looking back and saying, we took the safe derivative road decades ago and we never got off it.
We're just stuck in the rut.
And as the source material notes, this is the kind of raw, unfiltered take that makes corporate publishers extremely nervous.
I bet it does.
Criticizing the foundational tropes of the genre's biggest current bestsellers is seen as highly disruptive.
But I want to jump in and defend the modern fantasy landscape for a second here.
Go ahead.
Let's look at Sanderson again, since Card specifically highlighted his magic system. If the magic is highly creative, if the character work is depthly engaging, and the narrative pacing is spectacular, does the Tolkien shadow of a feudal setting really hold the story back?
That's a fair question.
I mean, is a story inherently compromised just because it uses a king instead of a president or a mayor? Isn't Card just being a bit of an aggressive purist here?
That's the most common defense, and it's a valid one. For millions of readers, the familiar political setting is a feature, it's not a bug.
It's comfortable.
It provides a comfortable, easily understood framework so the author can spend their complex world-building energy on the magic system or the character psychology.
You only have so much cognitive bandwidth as a reader.
Exactly. But for Card, it's a profound failure of imagination. He believes that the political and social structures of a fantasy world are just as important. He believes that a culture's fantasy should reflect its own foundational myths, its own unique anxieties and triumphs.
It needs to be culturally relevant.
And to his immense credit, he didn't just sit on the sidelines writing essays complaining about Tolkien's shadow. He spent almost 4 decades actively building the exact alternative he argued.
Yes, and that alternative is the monumental Tales of Alvin Maker series. This is where Card truly puts his money where his mouth is.
He absolutely does.
According to the sources, this epic project began way back in 1987 with a novel called Seventh Son.
1980.
And it just concluded 39 years later with the release of the final volume, Master Alvin, on April 28th.
39 years. That's a lifetime.
It really is. We are talking about a continuous, multi-generational narrative deeply tied to American spiritual and folk tradition. It is fundamentally a magical reimagining of the American frontier.
The sheer scale of a 39-year project is difficult to fully grasp.
It's hard to even commit to a TV show for 5 years.
Right. To sustain a single thematic arc for that long requires a staggering level of creative discipline.
Absolutely.
But what is truly fascinating for us to analyze here is how an author's worldview inevitably evolves over 4 decades.
You change as a person.
You are not the same artist or the same person at 75 that you were in 97. Your understanding of history, of morality, of human nature, it all shifts.
Yeah.
And we can actually see that evolution visible in the creative choices Card makes in this concluding volume.
The sources highlight a highly specific and honestly surprising choice he made for Master Alvin.
Yes, the setting change.
He takes the protagonist, Alvin, out of the Americas entirely and sends him to Ireland.
Which is a huge curveball.
Huge. Now, to understand why this is such a big deal, we have to provide a little context for you listeners. The Alvin Maker series heavily and intentionally parallels the life of the real-world historical figure Joseph Smith.
The founder of the Latter-day Saint movement.
Exactly. But the real Joseph Smith never went to Ireland. Card deliberately shattered the historical parallel he'd been building for almost 40 years.
Which begs the question, why?
Right. Why do it? Because he explicitly wanted to avoid repeating.
Exact. Prior to this, Card had written a deeply researched historical novel called Saint, which focused heavily on
the city Joseph Smith built on the banks of the Mississippi River.
Right. And in the Alvin Maker universe, Alvin is destined to build a utopian Christian.
I see where this is going.
Card realized that if he followed the actual history of Joseph Smith, he would just be writing a fantasy reskin of Nauvoo. He would be telling the exact same story twice.
But we know how much he hates repeating himself.
Exactly. So he took Alvin somewhere completely new, indulging his own deep love of Irish history in a fresh way. It's a masterful use of alternate history as
It really is.
by changing specific historical variables, like sending an American folk hero back across the Atlantic, an author can isolate and examine different aspects of a character's core moral architecture without being chained to a history.
The Fandom Pulse article actually dives into the religious and philosophical underpinnings of this architecture.
What do they say?
They point out that Card's Latter-day Saint faith deeply influences his view of the America. He incorporates the belief that the Americas are a chosen land, like a unique geography where free people are meant to thrive and where tyrants inevitably lose the mandate of heaven.
That's a very specific thematic framework.
It is.
Yeah.
And he apparently explored this exact concept in a short story called America from his collection Folk of the French.
Oh, interesting connection.
So for you listening, just imagine dedicating yourself to a single creative endeavor from 1987 to the present day, weaving your deepest spiritual, historical, and political beliefs into the very fabric of the story.
The dedication is just awe-inspiring.
It is, but I do have a structural question about this choice.
Okay, shoot.
If the entire premise of the series, like the whole reason it exists, is to be the definitive American frontier fantasy, how does taking the final book to Ireland not completely undercut the thematic DNA of the story?
That is a very perceptive question, and it really speaks to the complexity of the narrative.
Right, because it feels like a contradiction.
One could strongly argue that it doesn't undercut the myth, it actually expands it.
How so?
Well, the story of the American frontier is inextricably linked to the immigrant experience, right? The brutal, hopeful idea of leaving the old, rigid world for the boundless potential of the new.
Okay, yeah.
By taking Alvin to Ireland, Card is essentially running the frontier narrative in reverse.
Oh, wow.
He's placing his uniquely American protagonist directly into the rigid, old-world structures that he, as an author, so intensely dislikes in fantasy. It's a complete collision of paradigms.
That makes a lot of sense when you put it that way.
However, there is a massive catch to all of this.
Which is?
To truly appreciate the nuance of alternate history, to feel the thematic resonance of taking an American folk hero to Ireland, or to understand the subversion of parallel historical events, a reader must first possess a solid understanding of action.
And here is where our sources take a very sharp, very critical turn.
They really do.
Because according to Card's experience, the modern American reader drastically fails to meet that baseline requirement.
Yes. This is where Card's critique shifts away from his fellow writers and points directly at the audience.
It gets personal.
And it brings us right back to that devastating story John Del Arroz highlighted from the interview.
The George Washington letter.
Exactly.
The fan who wrote to him, praising the book, but admitting they had absolutely no idea George Washington hadn't actually been beheaded in real life.
It still blows my mind.
They consumed a fantasy alternate history and literally filed it away in their brain as actual American history. They had zero frame of reference to realize it was a fictional deviation.
The cultural implications of that are genuinely staggering.
It's terrifying.
But Card doesn't blame the reader here. He blames the system. He points a finger directly at decades of what he calls public school catastrophe.
Public school catastrophe.
Yes, arguing that there is a profound systemic lack of foundational historical knowledge among today.
Which makes writing alternate history pretty difficult.
It forces him to ask a critical, almost existential question for a writer operating. How can an alternate fantasy resonate properly if the readers don't know the real history first?
Think about the mechanics of that for it. It's like trying to explain the genius of a complex musical remix to someone who has never heard the original song.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. You sit them down, you play them this incredible layered track where the artist has like inverted the bass line, chopped up the vocals and half the tempo.
The total reimagining.
And the person just shrugs and says, yeah, it's a cool song.
Because they have no idea what was changed.
Exactly. The entire artistic achievement of the remix, the tension between what your ear expects to hear and the wild direction the artist is actually taking you, is completely invisible to them.
That highlights exactly how the mechanics of subversion operate in literature.
Yeah.
Subverting a trope or twisting a historical timeline relies 100% on the audience's baseline knowledge.
You have to know the rules to break.
The author and the reader have to be looking at the exact same map of reality. When the author suddenly sets the map on fire, the reader is supposed to gasp.
Right.
But if the reader never had the map to begin with, setting it on fire isn't a subversion. It's just raw, meaningless data. It fundamentally neuters the power of the literature.
I hear that loud and clear, and the lack of historical literacy is a real issue. But I have to push back a little on putting the blame entirely on public education.
Okay. What's your theory?
Is it entirely the fault of the school system? Or is it highly possible that fantasy as a genre has insulated and trained readers so thoroughly that they expect everything between the covers of a novel to be entirely made up? If you are trained by the publishing industry to constantly read books set in completely fabricated world with invented political systems, invented geographies, and complex magic systems.
Your brain just adapts.
Right.
Right.
Maybe your brain just automatically categorizes everything you encounter in that genre as pure fiction. To a reader immersed in that specific mindset, the name George Washington might just register as another fantasy character name.
No different than Aragorn or Jon Snow.
Exactly. They just assume he's a made-up king for the story.
That is a very fair counter-argument. The genre absolutely trains the reader's expectations, and we read fantasy specifically to escape reality, so the guardrails of historical fact are naturally lowered.
It's an escapist medium.
But for Card, this isn't just a casual, amusing observation about genre trope. He views it as a symptom of a much deeper rot in how we handle foundational knowledge as a culture.
He takes it very seriously.
Very serious. In a world of constant information overload, we are rapidly losing the shared cultural vocabulary required to communicate complex ideas.
Yeah.
And Card's rigid defense of traditional foundations doesn't stop at historical facts either. According to our sources, his insistence on knowing the rules extends fiercely into the actual mechanics, grammar, and structure of the English language itself.
Yes, this part of the interview is utterly fascinating because it reveals how deeply, almost obsessive, Card cares about the nuts and bolts of his craft.
He is a craftsman through and through.
The sources note that Card's instructional book, Characters and Viewpoint, remains required reading in serious MFA programs and writing workshops decades after it was published.
Which is really saying something.
And just to provide context for you listening, MFA Master of Fine Arts programs in creative writing are often bastions of highly literary contemporary fiction. They traditionally look down on science fiction and fantasy.
They can be quite elitist.
Very. So for a sci-fi author's guidebook to be a foundational text in those rooms speaks to an immense level of technical authority.
Absolutely.
And Card uses that exact authority to strongly attack modern university writing instruction.
He is particularly aggressive regarding the modern trend of using present tense narrative in fiction.
Present tense, yeah, he really hates it.
He states unequivocally, and I quote, "Present tense narrative is not part of the American tradition. The past tense is how we tell the truth."
When I read that line in the source material, the past tense is how we tell the truth, it literally stopped me in my tracks.
It's a powerful statement.
It's such a declarative, philosophical stance on something as seemingly mundane as grammar. Why does he hold this line so intensely? What is the actual psychological difference for the reader between past and present tense?
Let's deeply explore the psychology of tense because it changes the entire relationship between the narrator.
Okay.
Why does past tense feel like the truth? When a story is told in the past tense, you walk through the door, she drew her sword, it implicitly promises the reader that the events have already been.
The story's already over.
Right. The narrator has survived the ordeal, compiled all the facts, and is now relaying a complete historical record. It lends an air of permanence and gravitas to the narrative.
It feels solid.
Present tense, he walks through the door, she draws her sword, does the exact opposite, feel artificially immediate.
Yeah, it's everywhere in modern fiction.
It is often utilized in modern fiction, especially young adult fiction, to manufacture a constant state of anxiety and tension.
The Hunger Games.
Exactly. But Card argues it lacks the foundational weight of a myth. Because the narrator doesn't know what happens next, it feels like a stylistic gimmick, like a real-time broadcast, rather than an honest recounting of a vital history.
That makes total sense. Present tense feels like you're watching a live stream. Past tense feels like you're reading a sacred text.
That's a great distinction.
But he doesn't just stop at narrative tense. He goes on a vehement defense of the English language against what he calls idiotic non-rules imported from Latin.
Oh, he hates the Latin rules.
He specifically champions the act of splitting infinitives like to boldly go and ending sentences with prepositions as treasured authentic traditions in English.
Which grammar snobs constantly tell you not to.
Exactly. He points out that the only reason we were told not to split infinitives is because poor Latin couldn't do it physically in its structure.
Right, because it's a single word in Latin.
Yeah, and he argues that's absolutely no reason to deprive ourselves of a perfectly good linguistic device in English.
Which is a brilliantly astute historical observation.
Tell me more about that.
If you look at the deep history of English grammar instruction, particularly during the Victorian era, scholars were obsessed with Latin.
Oh, everything was Latin back then.
They viewed Latin as the perfect divine language of academia and logic. English, with its messy Germanic roots, was viewed as somewhat barbaric.
So they tried to clean it up.
Exact. So these scholars literally forced Latin grammatical frameworks onto English to make it seem more respectful.
That's wild.
Card's rebellion against these Latin grammar rules perfectly mirrors his rebellion against European Tolkien tropes in American fantasy.
Oh, wow. The philosophy is identical.
In both cases, he wants the medium, the language, and the genre, the fantasy, to be absolutely true to their native, authentic root. He vehemently rejects artificial, imported frameworks.
I want to use a mechanical analogy here because it clarifies exactly what Card is so angry about.
Let's hear it.
Forcing Latin rules onto the Germanic roots of English is like trying to force a modern electric vehicle battery into the chassis of a 19th century steam locomotive.
That sounds like a disaster.
Right. You can try to wire it up, you can try to make the connections fit, but you were fundamentally misunderstanding the architecture of the machine.
Yes.
The locomotive wasn't built for that kind of power source, and English wasn't built for Latin syntax. And the sources note he credits his 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Johnson, as perhaps the last American teacher to give students a real grounding in how the language actually works.
Mrs. Johnson made an impact.
She really did. He even talks about how much he loved diagramming sentences on the chalkboard.
Which tells us everything we need to know about how his mind works.
It does.
He loves structure, he loves rules, he loves deep foundational logic. He wants the grammatical building blocks of the story to be as meticulously crafted and solid as the world building of the story itself.
But, you know, this rigid adherence to traditional structures, his deeply held personal beliefs, and his outright refusal to bend to modern trends or apologize for his stances eventually led to a massive systemic collision.
It was inevitable.
While Card holds immense, undeniable authority on the craft of writing and the history of the genre, his personal views ultimately fractured his relationship with the modern publishing industry in a profound way.
And this brings us to a highly sensitive, deeply complex part of our analysis.
It does.
It is essential here that we remain we are neutrally reporting the events, the fallout, and the claims exactly as they are described in the sources provided by John Del Arroz and the Fandom Pulse article.
Right, we are just conveying the information.
We are not endorsing the political or cultural viewpoints of either side of this divide. Our goal is to examine the mechanics of what happened to his career and how the publishing ecosystem reacts.
Absolutely. The focus is entirely on the industry mechanics. According to the sources, Card was heavily targeted and essentially canceled roughly 15 years ago.
Around the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Right. The sources attribute this massive backlash to his Latter-day Saint faith, his traditional political beliefs, and his public views on family structures.
Which became very controversial.
Very. The Fandom Pulse article and the John Del Arroz interview transcript detail a very specific, sweeping industry fallout that rippled across multiple media.
The sources outline a scenario of systemic reject by corporates.
What happened exactly?
They claim that Marvel Comics quietly stopped working with him on adaptations.
Just phased him out.
Yes. DC Comics took a much more public route, dropping him from a high-profile Superman anthology project due to intense public pressure.
Wow.
Del Arroz explicitly notes that the quote-unquote Hugo cool kids, which is how he refers to the modern peer group of the literary establishment, shunned, treating him as a pariah at industry events.
So his own peers turned on him.
Furthermore, his digital magazine, Intergalactic Medicine Show, which the source highly praises for producing excellent short fiction and supporting new authors, eventually had to wind down its operations.
It paints a stark picture of being completely cut off from the corporate entities, the PR machines, and the peer networks that completely control mainstream publishing.
It really does.
But here is the fascinating dichotomy that our sources present. Despite this total mainstream rejection, his grassroots readership didn't vanish.
No, they stayed right with him.
In fact, it remained massively mobile. Del Arroz cites a highly specific example to prove this. He mentions a time at DragonCon, which is one of the largest pop culture conventions in the world, where Card was brought in as a last minute.
A late addition to the roster.
Yeah. Yet he pulled autograph lines that were longer than the official guest of honor and longer than the massively popular current mainstream sci-fi author John Scalzi combined.
That is wild. This illustrates a profound shift in the mechanics of the public.
It shows where the power really lies.
We have to ask, how does an author with a 10 million copy bestseller, multiple Hugos, and lines wrapping around convention centers become completely persona non grata in the corporate sphere?
It seems like a paradox.
It highlights a broader cultural reality where an author's personal politics, their religious views, and their cultural footprint are weighed equally against, or in this completely supersede, their literary output and their market viability by the corporate public.
And according to our sources, that dynamic is heavily impacting the books being released right now today.
Yes, with Master Alvin.
Fandom Pulse and John Del Arroz claim that the mainstream publishing, specifically Tor Books' PR team, are essentially refusing to market his newly released final book.
They are completely ignoring it.
Del Arroz claims the publisher is acting as if the book doesn't even exist, providing zero promotional push for the conclusion of a 39-year epic.
Which forces a completely different, highly modernized business model for survival.
Right.
When mainstream avenues close, when the corporate PR machine stops turning for an author, alternative marketing ecosystems inevitably rise up to fill the void.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. The sources show how authors and independent journalists like Del Arroz himself are bypassing traditional tires.
Go around them.
They rely on independent, non-traditional media platforms and direct-to-consumer. The source specifically mentions platforms like Scribestar.
It is a crowdfunding platform.
Right. It's a direct subscription service that allows fans to pay creators directly, bypassing publishers entirely. It's a return to a very grassroots, word-of-mouth survival strategy, but weaponized with modern digital tools.
I really want you, the listener, to grasp the sheer scale of this divide, because it's unprecedented.
It truly is.
We are looking at a foundational author who can be simultaneously rejected and effectively silenced by the corporate institutions that once awarded him their highest honors.
Yet he still survives.
Right. He can still command massive block-spanning lines of devoted fans who have patiently waited 39 years for the end of a story. It's a completely fractured reality.
It's two different worlds operating at the same time.
Which makes me wonder, and I'd love your take on this.
Yeah.
Does this kind of intense cultural polarization actually help cement an author's legacy by turning them into a symbol?
Like a martyr.
Yeah, a martyr for their core readers,
Yeah.
who will now buy absolutely everything they write out of sheer loyalty? Or does being permanently cut off from the mainstream PR machine genuinely harm the reach, the impact, and the longevity of the literature itself?
The reality is that it likely does both simultaneously.
Both.
Yeah, it undeniably calcifies the existing fan base. It turns casual readers into fierce, dedicated advocates, as we clearly see with the passionate Fandom Pulse cover. The readers feel they are protecting the work.
They become a vanguard.
But on the flip side, it unequivocally limits the discovery of the work by new generators.
Out of sight, out of mind.
If your book isn't on the curated front tables at major books, if it's not being reviewed in mainstream outlets, new readers simply won't find it.
Yeah.
The literature becomes insulated. It survives on direct support rather than natural cultural osmosis, which means its broader impact on the genre inevitably shrinks over time.
Okay, let's synthesize this incredible journey we've been on today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've explored a man who built the defining pillars of modern science fiction with masterpieces like Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead.
Absolute classics.
We've seen how he explicitly rejected the safe European shadows of Tolkien to spend 39 years painstakingly building a uniquely American myth with the Alvin Maker series.
A monumental effort.
We've unpacked his fierce, highly structural defense of the fundamental rules of the English language and the absolute necessity of historical literacy.
Don't forget Mrs. Johnson.
Never forget Mrs. Johnson. And finally, we've navigated the complex, highly polarized mechanics of his complete fracture with the mainstream publishing industry, watching him survive now on the sheer power of a dedicated grassroots readership.
And through all of these different facets, the books, the grammar, the industry politics, the absolute core value for anyone listening is the vital importance of foundational knowledge.
It all comes back to the foundation.
Whether you are a writer constructing a world, a reader consuming a novel, or just an observer of modern culture, the recurring theme in Card's worldview is that you simply cannot build a sturdy house on sand. Whether it's understanding the true, unvarnished history of your nation so you can actually appreciate the subversion of a myth, or understanding the true mechanical roots of your language so you can tell the past tense, context is everything.
Without it, you're lost.
Without the context of yesterday, we entirely lose the ability to understand or even recognize the myths being built today.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought. It's something the sources hint at, but it's really worth you mulling over on your own long after you finish listening today.
Let's hear it.
If our understanding of alternate history, and by extension, our ability to process the grand, complex myths of tomorrow, requires a firm, shared grasp of the reality of yesterday, what happens to our collective imagination when that shared history continues to fade?
That is the million-dollar question.
If our education system and our cultural memory continue to fracture, and we truly forget the real George Washington, will we even possess the vocabulary to recognize the Ender Wiggins or the Alvin Makers of the future when they finally arrive? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the information around you, keep looking for the foundations, and we'll see you next time.